welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Hosting once again, your host with the moster, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me, as per usual, blogger, Vikings enthusiast, and generally all-around useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Doing pretty well. How are you, man?
You know, it's the golden hour right now in Denver, and the sunshine is like streaming into the back of my office, so I can see its reflected glory, like on the like sound deadening mats of my studio. So it's the perfect time to be in studio, recording an episode of Norse Code.
I'm not surprised that you are enjoying the greatness that is the out of doors from indoors.
That's what nerds do, right? That's like what we have to enjoy it vicariously, right?
Yeah, be sure to take like an iPhone picture or something.
I don't use an iPhone. Come on. Android all the way. You know this. This isn't news to our dedicated listenership.
Right.
Joining us this week is a very prolific writer, primarily for mlive.com on the Detroit Lions beat. We wanted to get him in here to talk some NFC North stuff. Justin Rogers, how you doing?
Hashtag Team Android.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
All right. We got another one.
We got another real nerd in the house.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need any company telling me what I can and can't do with my products, right?
Exactly. I want the freedom to install unauthorized packages. All right, Apple.
Exactly.
That's what I want. I'm aware of the security risks. Yes, I clicked the box.
Those $70 plugs. We're off to a great start, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
I'm just sitting. I'm outdoors. I'm not indoor. I have no sound deadening equipment around me. I'm under the moonlight in Michigan and sitting on my porch and looking forward to a good football conversation with you fine gentlemen.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
I would love the opportunity to do this show from my porch without being interrupted every 5 minutes by like emergency sirens. I just want to throw that out there.
I mean, my phone's going to keep buzzing with Twitter updates, so I mean, it's kind of the same thing.
Oh, see, that's the great thing about doing the show indoors is I've got my whole tweet deck here, so I can watch like every Twitter account while doing the show. It's pretty great. Before we dive into the Lions and their, I guess, hopes for the 2016 season, I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to everyone that's contributed to Norse Code in the past. Your dollars are powering the server space that makes this podcast available to you. You are also powering a good chunk of Arif's trip to training camp and a big chunk of his training camp guide as well. So without your contributions, the great Arif Hassan would not be able to do the work that he will do, and I guess to some extent already has done. So thank you all. If you would like to become a member of the Norse Code Posse, you can just give a one-time donation of any amount you like at paypal.me/NorseCode. Or, and this is our preference personally, if you go to patreon.com/NorseCode, you can become a recurring member, give any amount you want, from $1 a month to $5 to, and God bless you if you choose to do this, 100, whatever fits into your budget. I mean, we can't all be Harry Smith. Not all of us just signed a $51 million contract. But I'm just saying, if you did, it wouldn't hurt.
If you did, that'd be nice.
On to the show.
All right, so we've got Justin Rogers here from mlive.com. You should definitely follow him on Twitter. Justin, what's your tweet? It's just Justin_Rogers, right?
It is. Yeah, I'm not the former Buffalo Bills / 7 other teams cornerback, Justin Rogers, easily confused. He actually came into Detroit for a workout last year, which countless unnecessary jokes. But yeah, I'm the cooler of the two.
Oh no, clearly, I've actually never had this problem. Weirdly enough,
there's some guy named Arif Hassan out there. I don't know. He's like a politician or something. I googled that guy today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. None of them play football, as far as I can tell. But it's only a matter of time. Hopefully, anyway. Let's see. So you've written a lot about OTAs. You're a very prolific writer. You've been writing a lot about like OTAs and minicamp and stuff like that. And there's a couple of like key questions about the Lions this year that we'll get to in a second. But before we do that, what are your general impressions about the way the Lions handled the draft? And I don't just mean like the individual players and their talent level, but like what their strategy says about how they view themselves as an organization and what they think is important.
Well, what people need to realize is this is the first year for a new general manager in Bob Quinn. They brought him over from the New England Patriots organization, and they're, I think, hoping to capture some of the success from that franchise, even though it hasn't quite worked out for some of the other disciples from the Belichick tree. But
right, like Kansas City and Atlanta, right? They've got FO people, I think, from New England recently.
There's one more. Where are we forgetting? I guess Tennessee, and that's new as well.
Right.
And Atlanta's had some success, not much in the playoffs, but they've had a few double-digit win seasons, and I think Pewley probably got the axe a little early if you look at some of the talent and the way they've developed there in Kansas City. So maybe we're being a little hard on the New England tree, but this is Quinn's show, and he shouldn't be judged against
against
what the others have done.
Random, yeah, that makes sense.
And he's a young guy. He seems eminently qualified from the talent evaluation field. 15 years with the Patriots, working on both pro and college side. Was a college scout. Was their pro personnel guy for the last few years. So, it seemed like a good hire. Now we'll only see as time tell. But what he did with his first draft was he focused on the trenches, and I'm a big fan of that in general. I think it's a pretty common saying and something I agree with, that you win football games in the trenches, especially at the professional level. And his first 3 picks were offensive and defensive linemen. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head for the total of the 10 picks, but I think he grabbed 5 or 6 total offensive or defensive linemen, tackles on both sides of the ball. He grabbed a center, which was kind of a point of contention, possibly a weak spot on the roster right now. So, that was the big theme. And, Matthew Stafford's been sacked, I believe, 89 times over the last 2 years. So protecting Stafford, the franchise quarterback, is a top priority. And then we saw in Denver last year what a dominant defensive line can do. And it's not the first time we saw that. We saw it with the New York Giants Super Bowl runs as well. If you disrupt the passer on the opposing team, you're going to have a good chance of winning football games, week in and week out.
So one of the key points of emphasis, like you mentioned, was the offensive line, and that sort of revealed itself that very first pick with Taylor Decker. A lot of people, not the majority of the people necessarily, but a lot of people were projecting a wide receiver to be picked there with the departure of Calvin Johnson. It turns out they didn't select a wide receiver at all in the draft, and that leads to maybe a couple of questions about wide receiver. I don't think, like Jay Lee is going to sort of step in and fill the role right away as an undrafted free agent. And it sounds like you've got a bunch of receivers that over in Detroit that a lot of people consider to be number 2s. Golden Tate at number 2, Marvin Jones has been a number 2 for a long time. Both receivers that I think everyone kind of agrees are talented, but nobody that many people would say is like sort of a number 1 receiver. Do you anticipate that being a significant problem? Were you surprised that they didn't select a receiver at all in the draft? How do you characterize the situation?
Yeah, I think with 10 draft picks, which, one thing is weird about the 10 draft picks is they didn't trade at all. They stuck with 10 draft picks, and they stuck in all their spots the whole way through, which was already kind of interesting. But to draft 0 wide receivers was a little interesting. I put the percentage of them drafting a receiver in the first round at like 1% heading into that draft. I just thought there was no way it was happening, even though there were some interesting talent on the board. I thought they addressed it with Marvin Jones. And, Marvin Jones isn't a sexy name, but he was the best guy on the free agent market, I believe. And then I went back after they signed him, as, I think is important to do the due diligence. And I went back and I watched every single one of his targets last year. And it doesn't tell the entire picture. Obviously, you don't get to see all the routes that he ran where he wasn't a target or his blocking in the run game, but at least you get a feel for what he can do and where he succeeds when they're going to actually throw him the ball. And I came away a lot more impressed than I anticipated with what Jones offers to the passing game. And yeah, he was the clear-cut number 2 behind A.J. Green in Cincinnati, but he offered more of a vertical threat than I anticipated. He really was the deep threat in Cincinnati and pretty successful with it. Really good body control, really good tracking ability. But he also showed, success at all levels. He was a intermediate guy. He could take a short pass and make guys miss in short areas of the field. And he was good in the red zone. And we saw that more 3 seasons ago, where he caught 10 touchdowns. Had 4 last year, but he uses his body really well. And so I look at it and I say, yeah, these are probably two low-end number ones. Probably the better definition is two elite-level number twos, if that even makes sense. But
right.
Gold Tate's a guy that's averaged 90 receptions the last 2 years. And, yeah, the yards per reception took a hit last year, but he's a really talented wide receiver. A competitor to the highest degree, one of the elite open field guys, made 32 tacklers and missed last year, was second in the NFL in that category in the receiving game behind only teammate Theo Riddick. And if you look at what Tate's stats were before he came to Detroit, they're almost identical to what Jones's were in his last year in Cincinnati. I'm not saying that Marvin Jones is going to jump to 90 receptions in this offense because there's a lot of weapons, but to think that he can't catch 75 balls and kind of have some of the same averages and same impact in the red zone, I think is foolish. So I look at those two guys, just those two guys, and I think they could easily combine for, in the ballpark of 170 receptions. And then you got to look where the rest of the offense is going to come. And Theo Riddick out of the backfield caught 80 last year. Eric Ebron, the number one pick 2 years ago, who, obviously hasn't lived up to expectations, and even more so when compared to that Odell Beckham guy that was drafted slightly after him, but still caught 50 balls last year in his second season. He's still getting better. He's, got a potential to be a top 10 tight end in this league. Amir Abdullah is going to give you something out of the backfield, and then it's just a matter of who fills that slot, whether it's going to be Jeremy Curley, who's had, marginal success in this league for several years, or former 6th-round pick T.J. Jones, who's only had 10 receptions in his career, all came last year, but, is a player that also is young and improving and kind of flashed at the end of last season. So I think they're going to be all right in this receiving game for sure.
So there's a lot of things at play when it comes to the passing game. I think that I think that you're right that Marvin Jones is the best receiver available on the free agency market, and I think that even with sort of the decline of Calvin Johnson, I think that he's probably a step down from Calvin Johnson, which is like no insult to anybody really. But with that sort of, I guess, step back in the receiving game. But a step forward probably in the offensive line with the addition of Taylor Decker, maybe the addition of Jeff Schwartz, depending on, if he wins a battle or two, and, the development of Laken Tomlinson. Do you think that, overall the passing game will see depressed numbers, or do you think that increase in protection will sort of make up for the change in the receiving talent that's available with the Lions?
I really think it's going to remain consistent, and I wouldn't even be shocked if it ends up better. And I know that sounds really weird because you're not replacing Calvin Johnson one-to-one. It's not possible. Nobody should look at Marvin Jones as Calvin Johnson. It's not fair to Jones. It's not fair to the Lions offense. But if you look at Jones filling 75-80% of the production and the way that he does, the way he plays football, not the way Calvin Johnson plays football, the way Marvin Jones brings to the elements he brings to the game, and you add in extra production for Ebron, a little bit extra production for Tate, a little bit extra production out of the slot. Those are, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Calvin, obviously commanded 120, 130 targets a year. So those are going to get divided among the guys. And yeah, Marvin's going to eat up a lot of those, but those are a lot of plus talent players. I'm not saying they're stars. I'm saying they are above average receiving talents. And you've got a lot of plus receiving talents across the board on that roster. And Stafford really took some major strides last year. I think the offense is going to look different. I think it's going to look more New Englandish, if you will. A lot of short passes, letting guys do things after the catch. If you look at Stafford last year, he was dead last in yards per throw through the air. Completely leaned on his receivers to do it after the catch, and that's because that's the skill set they offer. So why not? And Jones adds to that. Jones adds to that more than Johnson did. He wasn't a yak guy. He was a physically imposing presence that got open through physicality, size, and speed. But once he caught it, almost always, went down right away unless he caught it on a bomb in the open field.
So do you think that promoting Jim Bob Cooter to offensive coordinator fundamentally changed sort of the offense's identity? And do you think that, having him as the coordinator at the beginning of the season this year is going to have a huge impact on the way the Lions, run their offense?
I don't think people give Cooter enough credit for what happened last year. Very rarely does a guy take over an offense in midseason and for it to go as seamlessly as it did in a lot of ways. And yeah, they got absolutely trucked by Kansas City in that first game in London, and it was a short week and weird travel schedule, and it was a disaster. Then after that, you're talking about a 6-2 finish. Probably should have been a 7-1 finish if you take away that Hail Mary at Ford Field with the quirky circumstances. Matthew Stafford completed 70% of his passes with a 19-2 touchdown to interception ratio. I mean, those are elite numbers. Nobody's calling Matthew Stafford elite. Nobody should be calling Matthew Stafford elite. But that second half was an elite performance from him in year 7. And he meshed with Cooter so quickly. And I think one of the bigger changes, more than anything, was just the simplification of the offensive line. I think that was the downfall of former offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi, is he just asked too much of the offensive line in terms of techniques and shifts and matchups for the relative youth of that group. And they really never adjusted quite right. There was a lot of mistakes, a lot of missed assignments, and when Cooter came in, and they also fired the offensive line coach and moved their tight end coach, who's also the assistant head coach of the team, Ron Prince, over to coach the offensive line. They really simplified what they did there in blocking, both in the run and pass game. And the sacks were cut. Stafford had more time. They maximized the talent for their receivers, and the results paid off on the field. And you can look at the schedule and say, yeah, well, the opponents weren't that strong. Well, you can only play who's in front of you. That's the bottom line in any sporting event. So you can complain about it, but like I said, those Stafford numbers for the second half were incredible.
Yeah, I just ran the numbers while you ran the numbers. I looked it up on Pro Football Reference while you were talking, and I gotta say that that bears out. It's sort of in the before the Kansas City game, so from San Diego to Minnesota, weeks 1 to 7, or games 1 to 7. Stafford had 6.5 adjusted yards per attempt, which ranks 28th in the league, 86.8 in passer rating, which ranks 25th in the league. And if you take a look, even if you include that Kansas City game where he threw 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, his yards per attempt was 4, I think. No, it's actually 6. Not great. Even if you include that Kansas City game, he ended up with 8.0 adjusted yards per attempt, which ranks 7th in the league. It's tied with Drew Brees. And his passer rating was 105.1. It ranked 3rd in the NFL. So I think that, kind of regardless of who the opponent is, and, I'm taking a look at the schedule, and, those opponents aren't great defensively speaking, regardless of who the opponent is, that is pretty impressive, right? And, I think that's a really good point, that Cooter doesn't get enough credit for, because it's hard to, it's impossible to install a new offense, really, midway through the season when you don't have playbooks to distribute, when you don't have, those reps to get all those plays in. You kind of have to stick with the offense, the offensive playbook that was put in before you, and cobble together what your version of that offense is going to be. So do you think that the offense is going to take another pretty significant step forward with, all of that? Or do you think there's probably going to be a little bit of bounce back? Because those numbers are kind of silly. Do you think there's going to be a little bit of a bounce back, or do you think that it's kind of just all, uphill from here because he's got all this time and all these resources?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Matthew Stafford's going to be able to continue video game numbers. I think that's probably a little unrealistic to expect, a career best completion percentage and obviously an absurd touchdown to interception ratio. But, you did mention already there's new offensive linemen, and that's a big deal. And there isn't a ton of top-tier defenses on this schedule. And, last year when this transition was happening, they tried to shrug it off and play it cool and say the changes weren't all that much. And, this offseason they've kind of been a little bit more open about it. And Golden Tate, we talked to him, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago, it was right before the draft, I believe, and he said something along the lines of, yeah, like he completely scrapped the playbook and tried to install all this new stuff from scratch, and like it felt like we were winging it in games at times, and it just makes the whole series of success even more absurd. So of course you're going to have more comfort in the offense. He's going to have time to adjust to his mistakes. So you got to remember he's one of the youngest, if not the youngest, coordinators in the NFL, So he's still adjusting. But, of course, teams are also going to have the film now on this guy, and they're going to be able to adjust it. So it's going to be interesting dynamic to see how that plays out. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with whether they can actually run the ball effectively. Amir Abdullah was much better in the second half of the season. You're talking about a guy that couldn't hold on to the rock in the first half of the year. Games 1 through 8, I think he put it on the ground 5 or 6 times, lost most of them, and then second half of the year, fumbled once. I think that's acceptable given his skill set, and averaged 4.7 yards per carry. I think that was an underrated fact in our component in the whole offensive success. And if they can continue that to some degree, it's a team that's historically struggled to run the ball with any success for, since Barry, if they can average, 4.1, 4.2 yards per carry, it's going to go a long way for the offense as a whole.
So that's going to be something that's going to be interesting to watch as sort of mini camp and training camp develops. Is there anything along the offensive line in terms of position battles that you'll be looking forward to, or do you think that the offensive line is pretty much set?
No, there's two really compelling battles. One is left tackle. When they initially drafted Taylor Decker, I think the consensus was that he would probably start his career at right tackle. A lot of the draft analysts believed he was a permanent fit for right tackle, but the Lions were open, or left it open, that he could play some left. He would get a good shot at that. Well, we've watched 5 practices now this offseason. They're not all open to media. Taylor Decker's taken every single snap at left tackle, and Riley's been at right tackle. That's really interesting, and my belief is they know what Riley offers on the left side, and they want to see what Taylor has to offer. Reef's in the last year of his contract. I think the long-term vision for the organization is Taylor's going to be that left tackle, that blindside blocker, and they want to see if he can handle it as a rookie. They're going to give him every opportunity to win the job. And then 2, kind of alluded to it earlier, but the center position is an interesting one. They drafted Travis Swanson 2 years ago, 3rd-round draft pick, guy that started 50 games in the SEC, has a reputation for being an extremely intelligent player. He hasn't performed very well at this stage in his career. He didn't play much as a rookie. Kind of was a spot duty guy at 3 spots. Started 1 game when Dominic Raiola was suspended at the end of the year. Did okay. And then last year he assumed that job from Raiola after the Lions opted not to renew that contract. And Swanson really struggled. Now, he had shoulder surgery in the offseason. We really don't know how much that impacted him last year because he's one of those guys that's refusing to talk to the media right now. But Bob Quinn, with his 3rd-round draft pick this year, went out and drafted Graham Glasgow from Michigan. You don't draft a center in the 3rd round unless you're expecting him to compete for a starting job. So right now, I would give Swanson the edge just because he's started before and he's got a few years under his belt, but it's probably a 55-45 battle right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that one plays out throughout the offseason.
Before we go to the defense, you mentioned something that I did want to bring up because I've hit this problem before too, and it's really infuriating. It sounds like with the offensive line is just they're not talking to the media.
Yeah, that's it's annoying. I don't know. Players I think have some level of obligation to talk about what they've done in the off season, what they're trying to accomplish. Their salaries are paid by the fans, and I don't care if they like me. I don't care. My job is to be a conduit of information. I'm just trying to do a job. I'm trying to do a service to the fans of the team. And right now, I was told by a member of the offensive line when I tried to speak to him today, and it's the 3rd time I've tried to speak to him this off season. He's put me off with the "I'll get you next week, I'll get you next week," which is code with "Don't bother me." But today he basically told me that the offensive line has a pact that they're not talking until it's mandatory. So real mature from those guys, but if you think I sacked Matthew Stafford all 89 times the last 2 years the way they're acting, but you try to do your best you can with the guys that do talk. There are some excellent human beings on that roster who are both accountable and informative. I feel grateful every day that I get to cover a guy like Darius Slay on the defense, and there are other people on that roster that are like I said, entertaining, informative, honest, that just get it. That, really it's about connecting with the fans, and the other thing is protecting your own individual brand. People can trash you all the time, and if you don't take the time to respond to those criticisms, then you let the narrative be controlled by the media or the fans, and that's not a good thing for your brand.
Well, on the one hand, I mean, you kind of feel like they might be inviting some of that by, not talking to the media. But on the other, weren't you just defending the argument on Twitter that fans don't really have that much right to be upset with the way a team plays or is covered unless they're losing?
I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but it sounds like something I would say.
Let me dig back a little bit. I'll pop my head up in a second.
Dusty's playing gotcha. Watch out.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's go.
Twitter gotcha is the best kind of journalism, by the way.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, and listen, I mean, my Twitter account is a whole different ballpark. Like, the way I write my stories is very traditional, very logic-driven, very fact-driven. I hate hyperbole. And then I get on Twitter, and I have fun. It's not like I'm throwing out hot takes left and right, Skip Bayless style, but, I'll be sarcastic and playful and crack jokes, and some people love it, and some people absolutely hate it. But listen, when you're churning out 1,000 stories a year on a football team, like, you need some levity sometimes. So Twitter's my outlet. At this point, my bosses haven't come calling and saying tone it down. It'll eventually happen, but yeah, different guy on Twitter for sure.
It appears that you brook no nonsense on Twitter. If somebody gets under your skin, you have no problem taking them out behind the woodshed, such as it is.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, no, I my favorite thing to do is when some guy just comes at you really hard with insults, I immediately just start flirting with them.
Ooh.
I just find it, what a way to break a guy down.
That's really good. Yeah.
Maybe send him a winky emoji and see if he wants to grab a beer. What are you going to do at that point? You have no other way to respond other than just you're stupid.
It's very disarming, perhaps in more ways than one.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't take anything personal. I mean, a fan to me, it's short for fanatic. You're fully invested in the product and emotionally invested. I'm not emotionally invested. I tell people all the time, I don't give a shit whether the Lions win or lose. There's going to be a story, either way. And would it be really fun to cover a Super Bowl or a deep playoff run? Absolutely. I mean, that would be historic. It would mean so much to the state and the city. It would be fantastic. From individual perspective, I really like some of the players, and I want to see them have individual success. It's not like we're buddy and going out and having beers, but just there's something to be said about hoping that good people have individual success. But end of the day, if the Lions are drafting 1 in the draft or they're drafting 32nd, I'm going to have something to write. And that's all I care about is doing my job, doing it honestly with integrity. And, if people don't like that, then there's a lot of places that write about Detroit Lions. I'm not making you read what I write.
It's true. We've had one of your competitors on the show before as well, a guy that writes for Detroit Free Press, whose name regrettably escapes me at the moment.
Mr. Burkett?
It doesn't sound right.
How about Detroit News? Josh Katzenstein?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I love Katzenstein.
He's great.
That's the other thing. They're all my competitors, and I'm competing with them every day, but I like all those guys.
Well, exactly. I mean, you got to be collegiate, right?
I'm a people person generally. It may not seem like it sometimes on Twitter, but I like people. I like hanging out with people, and I like the human interaction. So I don't know. What were we even talking about? I completely forget.
Well, I derailed the entire conversation by trying to play gotcha, and I haven't even found the tweet, which is embarrassing.
He probably never tweeted it. That's why.
That's probably true.
One last question before we get to the defense, because the defense to me is actually much more interesting than the offense. But I love Zach Zenner. Is anything going to happen? Like, Amir Abdullah is great. I think that he's probably an underrated running back, nationally speaking. But I kind of like just seeing Zach Zenner go. Is he even going to make the roster?
So Zenner right now is a bubble guy. I don't think there's any other way to put it. And really the only thing that's stabilized with the roster is Abdullah and Riddick. and Riddick is the receiving component. He's more of the Darren Sproles, and they're not the same player, they're not the same type of player, but Riddick caught 80 passes last year, but he averages about 3 yards per carry. He's a mediocre running back. They consistently talked about him getting more involved in the run game. I will believe it when I see it at this point, because from what I've seen so far, he's not effective there. And that leaves the door open for everybody else. They added Stephen Ridley this offseason. Hasn't practiced a whole bunch, but we saw a guy that was fairly effective when he was in New England before the ACL injury. Also had some fumble issues. Ball security is a problem, but it's a guy that averaged over 4 yards a carry, I think, for every season that he was with the Patriots. And then you have Zenner, who is also that kind of power component. People love him. He's a kid that just runs insanely hard. If you watched any of the preseason last year, he just was punishing all the second and third stringers from the other team. Helped him make the roster last year. He obviously put up monstrous numbers in college for one of the Dakotas. I'm not going to say the wrong one. Whichever one's the Jackrabbits. And he's a Minnesota kid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the nicest guy, and he's also. It may sound like a mean thing to say, but he's the least looking football player in the Lions locker room. He just looks like an average dude. He walks around. He looks like the guy that's maybe gathering the laundry for the other players. It's really weird. And
looks like the equipment.
He walks around wearing he walks around wearing wire rimmed glasses. And listen, he's 6 foot and built like a truck. But when he's just wearing like a t-shirt and sweatpants, he just looks like a guy. And he's so polite. He's obviously really smart. He's got a degree in pre-med and has.
I saw this picture of. I saw this picture of him, and I think it was the Detroit Free Press of him in like a lab coat doing lab work, and it just. You're right. He looks perfectly like he fits in right there.
Exactly.
And I think that if you saw him doing lab work, you wouldn't be like, "Oh yeah, that dude's obviously a football player."
He runs with the heart of a lion. Not to be so cliche, but he tries to run through everybody, and fans love that. They love the way he ran against the reserves in the preseason, and the coaches really like him. He's gotten a lot of first team reps during training camp, mini camp and OTAs, just because of the injuries in front of him, and so. I lean right now to him making the roster, but it's not a lock. But he could end up being the power component in this running game. He could outplay Ridley in the preseason. That's not inconceivable in any way.
All right, so we've been talking a lot about the Lions' offense. We mentioned that the Lions' offense sort of drove the team at the second half of the season, and for under the Stafford era, a lot of people have thought of the Lions as an offensive team, except. In 2014, the first year, I think, of Terrell Austin's, tenure as the defensive coordinator in Detroit, and they had a phenomenal defense. And of course, they also had Ndamukong Suh, and I think they had the last legs of what's the guy's name? The defensive end with the red eyes.
Kyle Vandenbosch. I think he was gone at that point. They did have Nick Fairley.
Yeah, they had Nick Fairley, and they were in the second year, I think, of Ziggy Ansah. So. They had a pretty good run going. They also had, I think that was the first year Glover Quinn kind of blew it up for the Lions. And so, people were thinking, hey, maybe it's a defensive team. And it kind of, sloughed off sort of in 2015. They weren't nearly as dominant defensively. And I'm a huge fan of Terrell Austin as a defensive coordinator. Obviously, the Lions like what they see because they could have had every excuse in the world to get rid of him when they were getting rid of everybody, and they chose not to. And so, there's a lot of potential here probably for this defense, not just because of Terrell Austin, but also because, the defense. You still have Haloti Ngata, Tyron Walker's returning from injury, and I think that he's kind of underrated, played really well for New Orleans. Karan Reed is still there. They just drafted Deshaun Robinson. Devin Taylor is very athletic. They signed Wallace Gilberry. So that front four, maybe not the same as it was in 2014, but, Ziggy Ansah, is turning into a premier pass rusher in a way that he wasn't. In 2014. And so, some of those things can change, but the back end isn't sort of inspiring confidence, at least, as from an outsider's perspective like mine. Like, are there answers at strong safety? I know Glover Quinn's still there, but is it going to be Miles Killebrew? Is it going to be Raphael Bush? Is it going to be Tavon Wilson? What's going to happen opposite Darius Slay? I'm personally a fan of Quandre Diggs, but I don't know how he did last year in nickel position. What's going on in that secondary?
All right. We'll start in the secondary and we'll work our way forward here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no. So Darius Slay, in my opinion, is one of the up-and-coming star cornerbacks in this league. Has all the tools you'd like, has all the confidence in the world. I think this kid's a future Pro Bowler, potentially a future All-Pro if things go right with him and the rest of the defense, because you're not going to get recognition if your team's not being successful consistently. Quinn's still there. Quinn's still good. He's a rock. He was a Pro Bowler 2 years ago when you mentioned he blew up, and really he was always a good player, but that year he picked off 7 passes and led the league in interceptions. That's going to get you some recognition as well. Incredibly smart player, always in the right spot, and I think the key for him is he doesn't miss his opportunities. Anytime that ball's in the proximity of where he's at, he comes up with it. And you can look at his highlight reel. It's just crazy how routinely he's in the right spot, and he's catching tip passes, and he's just always, like I said, always in the right spot. The other 2 spots are, question marks. You got Nevin Lawson, who's probably going to start on the other side. Was a 4th-round draft pick 2 years ago. As a rookie, had his foot crushed. It was just a disgusting injury. Dislocated his foot in the 2nd game of the year. Had to have emergency surgery in Carolina, directly out of the stadium to the operating table. Missed that entire rookie season. Came back last year, and mid-season he replaced Rasheed Mathis in the roster. So really physical cornerback, gets him in trouble sometimes. He had 7 penalties in coverage last year, or in the second half of the year, which is way too many, but the physicality also makes it tough for guys to catch balls on him. Only gave up completions about 54% of the time he was targeted. Doesn't get his hands on a lot of passes. He doesn't have an interception, but it's a player that the Lions like and they feel is continually getting better. They didn't invest in a cornerback this year in the draft or free agency. I think that was more surprising than even the wide receiver position. So they clearly believe in what Nevin Lawson has to offer, and they really don't have a good backup situation, which is, I think, even scarier. They got Darren Walls, veteran, pretty nondescript career. They got Alex Carter, last year's 3rd-round pick, who missed his entire rookie season with an ankle injury and hasn't looked all that inspiring in the early practices. Really is a rookie in a lot of ways, and more ways than one, because he's only 21 years old. So, and then the strong safety spot is interesting as well, because last couple of years it was James Ahedebo, and he fit that prototypical strong safety build and skill set. And he was replaced mid-season. He was benched last year for Issa Abdul-Quddus. And the Lions really took off with Abdul-Quddus in the lineup, and he didn't fit that typical strong safety mold. Yeah, he hit really hard, but he was probably better in coverage than he was in run support. So now you had 2 guys that were more of a free safety skill set back there, and that really worked for the Lions. So it intrigues me that they brought it in Raphael Bush, because that's a guy who is similar in that way that he's more of a free safety. I think he's one of the best tackling safeties, and that's an underrated part of his game is he just doesn't miss tackles. If there's a guy in his way, he's going down. And he's better in coverage than he is in the box, and I think he's going to end up winning that job. And it's going to be really curious to me how they use Quinn and Bush together, because the skill sets kind of overlap. But again, I mean, in the NFC North especially, wouldn't you rather have 2 guys that could cover versus just one and guy in the box? I mean, it's a passing league. Teams are throwing 65, 66% of the time, so I guess coverage is at a premium. So I don't see a big flaw in that. And the nickel, Diggs, go ahead.
I was about to say that makes a lot of sense. My question was going to be, the next about the linebackers, but I'm actually really interested in what you have to say about the nickel before we do that.
Yeah, no, Quandre Diggs was a 6th-round draft pick last year, and really played above his draft slot. He's a highly competitive guy. He doesn't necessarily have the measurables of a lot of elite talents, but really physical, really good in run support, good tackler. He was susceptible last year to being beat down the seam on, just go routes down the seam. He gave up a few early in the season, seemed to clean it up, and then ended up giving up another one late in the year. I think it's really the only weakness in his game. I mean, he's going to give up some receptions over the middle, but he tends to limit the damage on that. So if he can clean up those deep balls, if he can, stop being beat on double moves and getting out of position where his lack of elite speed doesn't allow him to catch up, I think the Lions are okay there as well. But once again, I mean, if any of those guys get hurt, especially Slay, I mean, things could fall apart real fast.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So I understand, this maybe not tendency, but like this move towards having, more coverage safeties than run support safety. And so it's important, when you have that, to have, a good run support nickel, potentially like Quantra Dix. But it's also, pretty important to make sure that, the linebackers are sort of tightened down if you're not going to get as much run support sort of in the same way, or at least, sort of a big physical hitter. You're going to want those linebackers to sort of tighten things up. And, the names, Stephen Tulloch, DeAndre Levy, those are great names, but Stephen Tulloch is 31. It sounds like he's not even going to be at minicamp. He hasn't been released yet, but it feels like that's an inevitability from what I know. And DeAndre Levy, is great. It sounds like he's more of a coverage linebacker than a run support linebacker, but he's just a very good linebacker. But the other linebacker spot, the middle linebacker spot, what's happening? Is it Tahir Whitehead on the outside? Is it Kyle Van Noy, who a lot of people liked but doesn't seem to be getting any movement? Is it, I don't know, John Bostic? Like, what's going to happen at those other two linebacker spots, and are they going to be enough to sort of fill in on run support?
I think you undersold Levy a little bit. I think he might be in the conversation for top 3 or 4 all-round outside linebackers.
No, he's a fantastic linebacker. Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Yeah, go back and look at 2014 tape again, and I know that's definitely what you're going to do. You're immediately hang up and be like, I gotta go check out Levy from 2014. But that was a guy that, 2013 was his breakout year, and that's where he pulled down all those interceptions and built the reputation as a cover guy. And then last year, 2 years ago, is where he kind of exploded in the other way. Tackles for loss went way up. He was one of the best run-stopping 4-3 outside linebackers in the NFL, and he's kind of slight in frame. He's kind of a wiry 235, 232 linebacker, but he plays so much stronger. The guy's a monster in the gym. He told me he deadlifts something like 700 pounds or so. He's just so strong, and he packs so much punch in his body. And he missed all last season. I think people don't realize how much that threw off the defense. Yeah, you lost Sue, well then you also lost DeAndre Levy. So you just took the 2 best players off that number 2 defense. No wonder they fell apart early. Tulloch's gone. I don't know what the holdup is there. Nobody can figure it out at this point. We've kind of exhausted every hypothesis. He told the team, or he told on social media, that his time in Detroit was done in February. He was told by the organization that they were moving on. I have no idea why he's still on the roster. None. I feel like they're just screwing with the guy's future and should just let him go. Tahir Whitehead, who was on the outside last year, is going to move to the middle this year. He's a fifth-year player. He's kind of figured it out. A little bit better in coverage than he is in run support, but I think a really solid starter. Average to slightly above average, and makes some really nice plays at times. Yeah, he's not going to be flawless. He's not going to be a dominant player, but a solid player. And then the outside spot, the strong side spot, the way Bob Quinn's kind of laid it out is, that's still a starter traditionally in the NFL, but you talk about a guy that's only going to play about 35% of snaps because they're going to be a sub-package. I don't know why we even call it a sub-package anymore, since nickel's really the primary defense most teams are in all the time. And that competition is wide open. I think the Lions would really like Kyle Van Noy to win it. His first 2 seasons have been a waste because of injuries. But you got to remember, that guy was a stud in college. I mean, a playmaking stud. Sacks, interceptions, fumbles, tackles for loss. He racks them up in big ways all the time. And if he can recapture any of that at the professional level, that's going to be a big boost to the Lions defense. But he's not a lock. I mean, he hasn't proven anything at the professional level, and they're hoping that he will this offseason. He's dropped a lot of weight. He's in great shape. The coaches are raving about him. He's taken the first team reps now, but he's going to have to prove something in the preseason to prove he belongs in that job permanently.
All right. So, it sounds like, with sort of the movement that's happening around linebacker, you think that the Lions linebacking core, obviously with DeAndre Levy back, Lions linebacking core is going to be, really, really good position to sort of perform the duties that will be asked of them then.
I mean, it should, and listen, Levy's health is going to go a long way. If Levy's solid, the unit's at least solid. And that's, I don't think they're going to be elite, but you've got a star caliber player in one spot and a quality player in the other, and really it's Quandre Diggs most of the time. It's going to be your third linebacker in a weird way, but that's just the way it works now. Yeah,
no, that makes sense. So sort of moving forward, like you sort of presaged, the defensive line, there's Ezekiel Ansah, who, like we mentioned, is turning into sort of a premier defensive end. And then, a couple of other guys that aren't really known for, rushing the passer as much. People that, have undeniable talent like Haloti Ngata or are athletic, but maybe we don't know if they're going to break out, like Devin Taylor, and, a bunch of nose tackles. Are there other ways for them to generate the pass rush? And do you think that this is a unit that also happens to be sound against the run?
It's so funny because I didn't think there was a way for them to generate pass rush last year. And, I looked it up the other day. I was surprised. They finished with like 44 or 47 sacks. They were 7th in the NFL. So they found a way to bring it from a variety of ways. And listen, that's a large chunk of that is definitely Ansah, who had 14.5, almost, eclipsed the franchise record last year and is still in many ways an ascending talent. Devin Taylor's getting better. He's got almost identical measurables to Ansah. He's just a little bit more. He doesn't have quite the. It's weird to say this because Ansah's only been playing football for a handful of years, but he doesn't have the instincts that Ansah has. As weird as that is, but that was a guy that had I think 4.5 or 5.5 sacks in the second half of last year. Continued to get better. The Lions obviously liked what they saw. We kind of talked about this with Devin Lawson, but they didn't upgrade the defensive end position in really the draft or free agency. And listen, there was nothing available in free agency that you weren't going to pay an absurd overcharge for. I mean, look what Vernon got from the Giants. I mean, it was just an absurd deal for a guy that, is above average, but not much more. So, premium and pass rushers, but Lions passed on a few in the draft. They passed on, guys like Dodd and Lawson to go out and get Decker. So they clearly believe in Devin Taylor. I think he could approach double-digit sacks, given a full season of starting reps. After that, I don't know. Wallace Gilberry, it's a guy that's, 30, had one good season in a reserve role. One good pass rushing season. It's not fair to say one good season. He's obviously stuck in the NFL for a while, so he's not like he's a scrub, but, he's not a guy that's going to give you a ton of pass rush pressure.
Is he going to? Do you think he's going to kick inside on nickel downs, Wallace Gilberry? Because he did that a lot for Cincinnati.
It wouldn't surprise me. The Lions did that a bit with Jason Jones. It really depends on the depth they keep along the defensive line. I mean, they might end up keeping 5 tackles. It seems like a realistic possibility. So do you need a 6-1 in your defensive end? Probably in certain sub packages, but I don't know how much you'll see it. I haven't seen a ton of it in practice so far, but it's still really early. And then the fourth defensive end is Anthony Zettel right now. He's a rookie out of
Penn State guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one too, because that's a guy that's probably a tweener that could slide inside too. He's not doing any of that right now. I think they're just working on getting him acclimated to being an attack first edge rusher. But how much do you expect out of a 6th-round pick? You really can't expect a whole lot, especially from the defensive end position where talent is so scarce that teams have just scouted those guys so thoroughly. I'm skeptical about the pass rush. I think they're going to have to find creative ways to bring it with, whether it's the strong side linebacker blitzing or, Levy showed that he could blitz a little bit when he was healthy in 2014. I think, Quandre Diggs actually showed he's a pretty capable blitzer, and I think people forget Glover Quinn was one of the most aggressive blitzing defensive backs in his last year at Houston. I think they used him more on pass rush than percentage-wise than any defensive back in the NFL that year, if I remember correctly, before Pro Football Focus stole my favorite numbers away from me. Damn you, Pro Football Focus.
I'm with you on that. One interesting thing about Anthony Zettel to me, and this is more, maybe it's not even a question, but you gave me an assignment to watch, the 2014 Lions, to watch DeAndre Levy and run support. So I should give you an assignment. I think it's only fair. 2014 Penn State, Anthony Zettel. I think that he did a really good job in 2014. His 2015, I don't think popped off. He obviously played more a defensive tackle role for them. But as a defensive tackle, getting 8 sacks, getting 17 tackles for loss, that's pretty impressive. So, maybe I don't know if you've talked to the Lions about this, but like maybe one of the reasons they selected him is they like what they saw in 2014. Maybe they're projecting him more to fit that role, fit what he did in 2014 more than he did in 2015.
And it's such an appealing scheme for those guys to play in along the defensive line because the way the Lions approach it, and you probably can appreciate this to some degree with Zimmer, is it's just attack. It's attack, regardless of whether it's run or pass. Those guys' first priority is they have a gap, and their goal is to get to that gap as fast as possible, to get to that spot as fast as possible. And there's guys that come to this team that maybe have only played 2 gaps or largely played 2 gaps in their career, and they're just in love from the day they step on the field because all they're doing is just go. It's all about get off for this team. So it's not. I don't want to make it sound like it's simple, but it's not complicated. Your job is to get after the football, and guys just fall in love with it from day one.
That's really concerning for me as a Vikings fan. So it sounds like overall you're pretty optimistic about the Lions, or at least you're speaking in positive terms about sort of most of the position groups or most of the areas of responsibility on the offense and the defense. I think maybe you're a little bit more optimistic on players like Eric Ebron than I am, but overall, it sounds like there's a lot of positive takeaways for the Lions entering this offseason. That is really interesting, I think, because the Vikings and the Lions are projected by different people to be second in the NFC North. And you've got some outliers. I think Ross Tucker has the Vikings, winning the NFC North. But, for the most part, it seems like among people who are trying to project the NFC North, it's between sort of the Lions and the Vikings. They've got more experience.
We've been looking at different projections.
Oh, yeah? What have you been saying?
Well, I saw Pro Football Focus pick the Lions to go 4-12. Obviously,
4-12?
Worst team in football. I think they had some other teams worse by tiebreakers, but fewest wins in football. Let's go with that. And I don't think Vegas is particularly optimistic on them either. I think 7-9, and listen, the Lions deserve zero benefit of the doubt. I mean, this is an organization that has practiced ineptitude for the better part of 6 decades. I mean, there's just zero reason for optimism. I get it, like Caldwell doesn't inspire optimism. The loss of Calvin Johnson doesn't inspire optimism. But there are things I look at with this, the roster. I think getting DeAndre Levy back is huge. Massively underrated re-addition, if you will, to the roster, and addressing their biggest hole at right tackle. Whether it's Taylor Decker or Riley Reef over there, they've addressed right tackle. And listen, it's not a perfect roster, but I look at the schedule. The Lions have what would classify, and listen, I understand like the schedule, the idea of strength of schedule alters really quickly with, a few injuries here and there, but going into this season, the Lions' schedule is set up about as easy as possible in terms of, on paper. So, yeah, I mean, I get why people are projecting 4 wins or 7 wins or whatever, but in my opinion, if the Lions don't win 10 games, Jim Caldwell's got to lose his job. I mean, it's just a bottom line. He was brought back, I think, in a 1-year trial run with Bob Quinn, and everything's set up. The talent's there. They have quality talent at every level. Maybe not every single spot on the defense, but like we were talking about the defense, they got Ezekiel Hans up front and Haloti Ngata. They got DeAndre Levy at that second level, and then they got Darius Slay and Glover Quinn. Those are all Pro Bowl caliber talents at every single level of the defense. Stafford obviously is playing really well. I think the receiving core is very underrated. The run game is a massive question mark, but Abdullah can be good. Offensive line should be better, and I think the Lions have 2 extremely bright offensive and defensive coordinators. I think the coordinators are underrated. You mentioned Terrell Austin earlier. This guy's going to be a head coach in the NFL someday, and it's going to be soon. That first half of last year wasn't as a disaster. I think it's why he didn't get a job last year. He did not handle the loss of Sue and the unexpected loss of Levy very well. And I don't know how many guys would have, but the team struggled. They were terrible out of the gate. I mean, they were almost dead last in every important statistical category. But the way they finished and the way he brought that team together without getting an injection of fresh new talent in the second half of the year speaks volumes about him as a coach. And he's had something like 12 interviews over the last 2 off seasons, and I think he was a finalist for a pair of jobs, one that went to Quinn in Atlanta. Guy's going to be a head coach in this league, and probably the next 2 or 3 years, maybe even next off season. And
I've been pushing for him to be
in that conversation as well.
Yeah, I've been pushing for him to be a head coach as soon as possible. Get him out of the division. I
he carries himself like a head coach.
Oh yeah,
he really does. I mean, he's already got the presence with the players, with the media, with the community. I mean, he just has head coach written all over him, and it really, like I said, I think he was held back by the epic failure of the defense at the start of last year. But getting back those pieces this year, if they go out and he has anything close to a top 10 defense, I think you're looking at a head coach next offseason.
Wow, that's maybe fantastic news for Vikings fans. I think for him to be able to win a head coach position, he'll have to do pretty well, which is not good news for Vikings fans. But we'll see how that goes. Dusty, have you taken a look at any of the mailbag questions that might apply to Justin before we let him go?
Well, there was one. Matt Nelson at NMatt71 wrote in asking what the rumors of Tulloch being released would mean to the Lions' defense, but I feel like we covered that in moderately good detail. Yeah. I found.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to mean anything at this point. It's been in the plans. They've already got the backup plan for the middle linebacker. Really, what it means most is it's going to free up another $5.5 million of cap room. The Lions have something like $17 million after Tulloch's release. I think a lot of that's going to carry over to next season because they got a lot of guys from that 2013 draft class, from Devin Taylor to punter Sam Martin, Larry Warford, Darius Slay. Ansa's going to be into the 5th-year option, so it doesn't matter. But they got a lot of guys they're going to sign, so they could handle having a lot of cap carryover to help them absorb the cost of a lot of those guys that they potentially could re-sign.
Well, in other news, I did warn you that I might have a remarkably not insightful comment during the show, and I found the tweet that I was talking about on that note. It was you replying to Anthony Broom that, and I quote, "There's no need to worry about the opinions of fans until they stop selling out every game." I believe that you were trying to be snarky and maybe
that was me.
Get into the heads of ownership. And I would posit
that
to
was
you,
me devil's advocating for the Lions organization. They don't care what you think.
Exactly. And I would posit that some organizations, such as the Redskins, like Dan Snyder, would tell you that you don't even have to sell out every game to stop caring about the opinions of fans.
Yeah, I don't think Bob Quinn is checking Twitter and throwing out a poll for who you should draft. I mean, listen, these guys, the window for success in the NFL to maintain your job as a head coach or an executive is so short. I mean, the patience of ownership because of the patience of fan bases is so short. We've seen coaches fired after 1 year, which is just preposterous to me unless there's some kind of scandal beyond the field. Didn't the Browns axe Patton after 1 year?
Okay. Let me ask you a question. This is something unique to Detroit that might set a maybe negative precedent for the future. Do you think that since the Lions committed what is normally like season suicide, fired almost their entire coaching and front of office staff mid-season, and then turned it around and got some really elite play from their quarterback and finished quote unquote strong? Do you think that is going to set like a bad precedent for other teams that are calling for the heads of their coaches or perhaps their GMs in the middle of a season?
I don't know. I would hope not. I think you look at history there, and you're always going to find outliers. And last year was certainly an outlier, but most teams continue to stumble and bumble their way to their finish and it's just it's a statement by the organization that they're not going to take it anymore, and it also allows them to kind of get a head start on finding a replacement or seeing what they had. Listen, that gave Jim Caldwell 9 games or 8 games or whatever it was to truly evaluate what he had in Jim Bob Cooter. And okay, he kind of had a boy wonder in his midst, and maybe he knew that already because he identified him as a quarterback coach really quickly. But had he waited and fired Lombardi, it would be a lot more, I think, concern or unfamiliarity with the offense going into this offseason. So, it worked well for the Lions. I still think there's a value to firing coaches early that are failing. But
they had some structural stuff in place that made it easier for them, that sort of thing.
Say it one more time.
They had some structural stuff in place that made it easier for them. They were in a situation where they could pull off a firing like that, and it wouldn't blow up the whole operation.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was unexpected. I think you look back at it in hindsight, and you still are amazed at how well it worked out. But like I said, it helped identify, I think, a rising coaching star in Cooter, and we'll see if that holds true in his second season, where what he did in that first year is tested.
Awesome. Well, before we let you go, Justin, is there anything that you would like to plug? I know you are a very prolific writer, but is there anything in particular that you've got coming down the pike?
No, I guess not. I mean, obviously you could find whatever I write about the Lions, if that's your thing, Vikings podcast listener, on mlive.com/Lions. I know that's we're a huge audience for you guys 2 times a year. And then, follow me on Twitter if you want to have some fun. I could banter with the best of them. I don't take myself very seriously. So you can always find me on Twitter, ready to engage at Justin_Rogers, ROGERS.
There is no
like that
D
that
in
fell
Rogers.
up in Green Bay.
There is a D in Detroit, but not in Rogers.
No D here. Yeah. Play no D in my household.
Ah. It's all attack all the time.
That's right.
All right, fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. We should do it again sometime.
Oh, we would love to.
Yeah, no,
that would be fantastic. We'll get in touch with you right before the game, and then maybe again before another one.
Yeah, let's just do 5 minutes before kickoff. Nail it.
Yeah, perfect.
Right.
Yeah, we'll do that. All right. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, fellas. Yeah, anytime.
Awesome.
Wow, that was fantastic.
That was great. A lot of detail.
I know, and what amazed me is that he was able to just like plop down on his porch with like a glass of whiskey and then just have, that everything he said basically, accessible to him. I'm not going to fact check it. I assume it was all accurate because it certainly seemed like it was born out of a deep knowledge of Lions history and the roster and scheme, et cetera, et cetera. But I got to tell you, I am not that enthusiastic about the prospect of facing a newly re-energized, youthful, dynamic Detroit Lions defense.
He definitely made it sound like the Lions were going to be punching above their weight this year.
Well, I mean, after last season, their season was marked by such, I guess, underwhelming performance at the beginning and then overwhelming at the end when it no longer mattered. Like, what even is their baseline anymore? Now the team's going to look so much different without Megatron. Like, I think they're an unknown quantity, and I think it's funny that there are projections that vary so widely between winning the NFC North outright and finishing 4-12. I guess it.
Yeah, no, I was surprised that he didn't see that many positive projections of Lions. When he was quickly doing it, I was trying to look them up. I know that ESPN had them at 8-8, and I'm kind of surprised I didn't find it. Maybe my eyes deceived me, but I do remember Vikings fans being a little bit upset that some people were projecting them third to the Lions of all teams, and that I thought I had seen a couple of second place finishes in the projections for the Lions. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they really are being disrespected. But yeah, no, there's definitely a huge split between sort of that massive firings and what happened before and after. So they were 6-1 with that win coming in overtime against the Chicago Bears. Before that massive firing, the Minnesota Vikings were the last team that old staff, had in place. And then after that, they won 6 of their, I think it's 9 games, yeah, right? 7 plus 9 is 16? Yeah. So they were 6-3 to finish the season with their losses coming against the Green Bay Packers, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the St. Louis Rams. 2 of those teams made it to the playoffs. So certainly a big turnaround for them since I guess you could say exodus, although that makes it seem kind of voluntary, of significant part of the coaching staff and the front office. So we'll see. We'll see. What that translates into for them going into this season. I certainly think the Lions are, based off what Justin is telling us about the national perception. I certainly think the Lions are a little bit underrated going into the season. Somebody the Vikings should watch out for. If he's right about everything, and I've got my suspicions that maybe he oversold a couple of things. If you're listening still, Justin, not to throw shade at you, but I am obviously very worried about them. But I do think that the Vikings are still a little bit better than the Lions, even after all of that. Obviously the offensive line is going to be a big question for the Vikings, especially in the head-to-head matchups against the Lions. Where, Devin Taylor may break out. Athletically, he's very similar. Justin was right about that. Ziggy Ansah's, got me worried about, what they're going to do in pass protection. But other than that, maybe they won't be able to generate that much of a pass rush. If the Vikings get better sort of on the offensive line, I think they can win out. The key to defeating a team like the one that Justin was describing is sort of, tackling well. A team with Golden Tate and Marvin Jones and Theo Riddick, people who produce after the catch, create a bunch of missed tackles. I mean, they have, I think it's 1, 2, and 3 in missed tackles per touch in Theo Riddick, Golden Tate, and Marvin Jones. So if they can clamp down on offense, they may be able to win out enough that their own offense can sort of take care of that defense. So we'll see how that goes. They're a pretty interesting team. There is some other Viking-specific news that we can cover, though.
Indeed, there is. Today was the first day of mandatory minicamp, a 3-day adventure where the players are trotted out for, I guess, some drills and some physicals and a couple of press opportunities to gauge the progress of players who are not really in a play situation.
We're going to see how, mini camp breaks down. We're going to see, there's not a bunch of stuff to report about mini camp that's not being reported at OTAs. But there's a couple of things. I know Tim Yoder at Scout.com, a story that we're going to link in the show notes, mentioned that Andre Smith is seeing a totally different system with the Vikings than he did in Cincinnati. So that's going to be sort of an interesting thing. If he can adapt sort of what it means to have a different system, a different sort of blocking scheme, whether or not he can adapt and become the right tackler, whether or not Phil Lodeholt's going to win that from him. We'll see. Minicamp is going to provide probably a couple of new storylines, but nothing that we haven't seen before.
Well, and at least, judging from the photos on Vikings.com, we can safely gauge that Adrian Peterson looks great running through the Little Red running cage while being hit with a foam stick.
Yes, the key responsibility for him heading into the season.
So, Mike Zimmer took a brief press opportunity to talk a little bit about what he saw, and he has seen improvement from Teddy Bridgewater, which has been reported on to some extent already. But somebody else that he talked about today after the first day of minicamp that I guess kind of raised some eyebrows was Cordero Patterson, an enigma wrapped in confusion, shrouded in a mystery on the Vikings roster.
Yeah, no, he mentioned that Patterson is going to be, not going to be, is more focused this year. He's running routes better this year. So that's obviously pretty big, as that was sort of the thing, right? It'll be interesting to see if that sort of carries over. It's not the kind of praise that he had for Patterson, in previous off seasons. And if there's one thing that we've kind of figured out about Coach Zimmer is that he tends to be fairly light-handed when it comes to praise, and when he does praise, it tends to be a little bit genuine. He could have singled out other players if he had wanted to. From my understanding, he picked out Cordell Patterson sort of apropos of nothing as a player who significantly improved. So it'll be interesting to see if he continues that sort of focus, that understanding, that sort of development, because then it'll prove that the Vikings may have been correct in selecting someone like him, trusting the coaches to be able to turn him into sort of a genuine receiver. If not, he remains a really good kick returner, but probably not one who's going to be in contract with the Vikings next year. He's the one player out of that 2013 draft class in the first round that they did not pick up the 5th round contract for. But if he can figure out how to get the offense to pay attention to him, to get the ball in his hands, well, then obviously that'll be a huge asset, because we know how good he is once the ball is there.
It's just the getting the ball to his hands that has proven to be so elusive this
so
entire
very
time.
elusive.
On the other side of the ball, a story from 1500 ESPN got picked up by the Daily Norseman about how Xavier Rhodes has been in Miami all offseason, which is not the worst place to spend your offseason, but it's even better if you get an opportunity to, practice the old football skills with some of your homeboys who are also from that area. And it becomes even better than that if those homeboys are people like Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham Jr., and the Dolphins' own Jarvis Landry. That's
also evidently Geno Smith? ?
Well, somebody's got to throw the ball.
That's true, and I think that even when you've got a mediocre quarterback throwing the ball, it does a lot of good to do some offseason work against elite, receivers. Because even if the ball doesn't arrive, you know whether or not you were beat and how you were beat. So, that's obviously very good news. It's the kind of traditional offseason story that we don't really know what to make of in terms of its totality. But I'd rather that sort of thing happen than not. I'm pretty excited to see if he has the ability to get back to sort of the form that he had at the second half of the 2014 season. I think that was sort of his best run of play. Justin mentioned Darius Slay. They're not as a guy who can become a Pro Bowl cornerback. They're not necessarily similar receivers. I think Rhodes may even have something like 20 pounds on Darius Slay, who is extremely athletic in a bunch of different capacities. But I think that they could be sort of in the same category. They're almost at a Pro Bowl level. They're not quite there. The only way at their current level of play they would make the Pro Bowls, if a couple of people decided to opt out, which not unusual, but there you go. And he's going to have to do a lot better in order to sort of live up to the potential that he's shown, which is not to say, that he's a bad cornerback. He's been fine, but Vikings fans are waiting for a little bit more. They just got Harrison Smith on that that great contract, and you've got an elite safety. You could do so much more once you have an elite cornerback to go with him. The Richard Sherman to his Earl Thomas, if you will. So that sort of thing, probably helps a lot. Mike Zimmer mentioned, in that story that, when Rhodes has come back every offseason, it feels like they kind of have to start from the ground up again, and it doesn't feel like that there. So even if it wasn't working against talented people, maybe it was just working in the way that Zimmer wants him to work, whichever one it is, it seems like it'll have improved his prospects going into training camp.
Well, I would frankly see stories like this, or really stories about him, doing work anywhere rather than stories of rumored Eddie Lacy sightings at a Moe's Original Barbecue,
Right. Losing 30 pounds and still being 20 pounds overweight, those stories.
Exactly. Or, finding yourself shot either by you or someone else in either a strip club or a park. Depending.
Yeah, a lot of off-season stories that could have been and it wasn't. So
exactly.
Good news, everybody.
For what it's worth, I will take it. Twice on Sunday. You wrote a pretty interesting article, or one that's been getting a little bit of circulation for purpleptsd.com, which is a difficult website name to say into a microphone. But
I've started doing a little bit of writing about once a week for Purple PTSD, and a lot of it is sort of analytically driven because it's a format that I think fits that for me a little bit better. They don't mind if I just throw in a bunch of tables together and just say this is what these tables mean and just kind of move on, which is sometimes that's what I want to do. And so we've got I've got a couple of pieces up there, and the most recent one is about predictability in the Minnesota Vikings offense and what Norv Turner has done with the Vikings offense as is. There's been a couple of problems with it, and I would argue so I did a bunch of analytical groundwork for 3 different facets of predictability, and those were the same facets that when players break down film of their opponents, they look at. They look at personnel, they look at down and distance, and they look at formation. And I did some very, very simple work on personnel, and I did some very, very simple work on formation, stuff that doesn't go too in depth. But the Vikings, they ran it more than any other team on 1st and 10. When you control for, the red zone, they ran it actually even more. Not even more than they normally do because they ran in the red zone a lot, but they ran it even more relative to other teams because other teams like to run it in the red zone too. And so knowing that the Vikings were in first down, was good enough information to, basically know that they were going to run the ball 65% of the time, which is pretty stunning. It's more than any other team by a significant margin. Only the Rams were even above 60%. And they have Todd Gurley and no quarterback. So it was kind of interesting taking a look at all of this. If you know the Vikings personnel and you know their down and distance, then you would be correct in guessing, whether or not they were going to run the ball over 80% of the time, sometimes even 90% of the time, which is really, really unusual. No other team has had like a combination of personnel and down and distance where you could predict whether or not they were going to run and pass over 90% of the time, even when teams were in third and short and had two tight ends on the field. So it was probably the most predictable offense. It was the most predictable by down and distance. It was in the top 5 in terms of the predictability statistics, basically. Just by personnel and by formation, and by formation I just mean shotgun or under center. I don't mean, when they're an ace formation, which is a pretty heavy run alert for the Vikings when they've got a wide receiver split, out wide versus sort of, in between the numbers and stuff like that. I just looked at shotgun versus under center, and the Vikings, had the 4th most sort of telling offense when they were in shotgun, which is to say, when you if you guess whether or not they're going to pass the ball or run the ball based solely on whether or not they were going to be in shotgun or under center, you'd be right about 60% of the time, which is 4th in the NFL. Only the Dallas Cowboys and the Rams were significantly above the Vikings in that respect, and the Vikings were close to tied with the New England Patriots in that respect.
Well, but despite our best efforts, or best attempts to teach him otherwise, and our hopes beyond hope, Adrian Peterson looked terrible running out of the shotgun too.
Yeah, and I took a look at that too. I took a look at his 2015 shotgun versus under center yards per attempt, and I looked at his career shotgun versus center yards per attempt, and I even emailed Football Outsiders. I was like, hey, is there something I'm missing here? Do you think that? And I didn't think there was, right? But maybe his success rate in shotgun is better than the difference between his yards per carry, because his yards per carry under center is 4.9. It's basically just above his career average, whereas, his shotgun yards per attempt was 3.8. And out of all of the premier running backs I could find that had at least 400 attempts, and, I kind of expanded the definition of premier a little bit. It includes players like Latavius Murray. It includes players like Doug Martin and Frank Gore. But, for the most part, people agree that all of these running backs are good. Out of all the good running backs who've had 400 career attempts, he has the lowest in shotgun yards per attempt, and the lowest yards per attempt of either shotgun or under center with 3.8. He also has the largest difference between his ability to run under center and his ability to run under shotgun with a 1.1 yards per attempt difference, more than anyone else. He also has a huge success rate difference. His success rate is as defined by Football Outsiders. His success rate is just north of 48%. That's pretty good. The average in the NFL is about 46.3%, but in a shotgun, it's only 36%, which is lower than the lowest success rate for any running back at all last year by 3 percentage points. It's enormous. So he's really bad at running a shotgun. So the solution isn't to run Adrian Peterson when you're in shotgun, but the solution also isn't to give up and just throw the ball when you're in shotgun because they have the ability to jump passes and stuff like that. The solution is to also run the ball when you've got Jerick McKinnon and either Matt Asiata or Jarrell Presley, whoever wins the third running back competition. And you want to run the ball and pass it when you've got both of those guys in there. And I think that that's pretty significant. I think that when you're in shotgun and you give away the fact that you're going to pass the ball, you're really limiting your opportunities. And it's not like the Vikings were really bad out of shotgun. They were pretty good passing the ball out of shotgun. I think over his career, Teddy Bridgewater is slightly better passing out of shotgun. Last year, he was slightly better actually passing under center. But under center, a lot of those are play action. So, there's a lot to parse there. But, the Vikings should mix it up, and they should mix it up in ways that, they aren't random. I mean, the most telling offenses by shotgun are just as bad as the least telling offenses by shotgun who seem to call randomly. But if you just take a look at the offenses that sort of have an average shotgun center run split, those tend to be the best offenses. Maybe, New England could get away with it, but like most offenses tend to be sort of in the middle. So the solution isn't to run Adrian Peterson under shotgun. It's to change who is going to be there in shotgun formation so that you can, win the chess battle. If they know what you're going to do based off of down and distance, based on whether or not you're in shotgun, based on personnel and stuff like that, you're really limiting a lot of your opportunities. And I think that the offense, wasn't as bad as a lot of people say. It was, the 14th best in points per drive. It was 16th in points per game. It was a fine offense. You want it to be better than average, though. And one of the ways that you can do it, make the offensive line better. That's huge. Grab a receiver in the first round. That's pretty big. But also, win the chess match.
Well, then it was just it seemed like a very frustrating confluence of circumstances. The Vikings went through so much in the offseason to get Adrian Peterson back for this season. And he was, designed as such an integral piece of the offense. And yet he was so terrible at running out of the shotgun that no matter what play you drew up for a given down or distance, you were just handcuffing yourself to this conception of the Vikings offense. And it was like watching your destiny unfold before you. You had no choice but to see what was happening. The Vikings were always playing with their cards face up because whatever the offense looked like it was going to be was probably true.
Yeah, no, it was very frustrating. And the Vikings did try running out of shotgun a little bit more often in the first 3 games of the year, I'm pretty sure, before they decided to give up on that experiment and only run really Adrian under center, very rarely run him out of shotgun. And that's a limitation of your personnel, but it's not a limitation that they needed to have given how good, Jerick McKinnon is, given sort of how surprisingly good Matt Asiata has been. I think he's been sort of an underrated piece on the Vikings the past couple of years. And he's somebody that I didn't anticipate being as good as he was. He's not going to break off those long runs, but he does increase your success rate pretty dramatically, not just in short situations, but just in general. They gave up on the shotgun experiment, but that's how they accommodate sort of somebody that they think is a good centerpiece for their offense, but they really should have been a lot more flexible about designing an offense that was more effective by being less predictable.
That's true, and I think at the end of the day, we're going to end up with the most, I guess, internally politically palatable solution for everyone. This way, the way that everything shook out, Adrian Peterson got to have his year where he was the guy for, all of his flaws and all of his amazing strengths. And now the team can very cogently make an argument. You're we love you. We want you to stay with us, but we see that you're getting older and we don't want you to take, every single carry. We want to try to bring in some of these newer, younger guys that maybe have a slightly different skill set. And, maybe we can approach something like a, happy and comfortable sunset with the career of Adrian Peterson rather than have it be a situation where, he is through his surrogates complaining in the media about how he doesn't feel he's getting the proper respect and how, he's carried this team on his back for no. You know how it could end. But it seems like it's not going to be like that.
Yeah, and I don't know how significant it is, sort of the internal politics of the play calling.
I don't think that's I don't want to get it twisted. I don't think that that's why last season happened the way it did. I'm just saying that maybe a happy side effect of last season playing out the way it did is that the Vikings got to win the NFC North and get themselves within a missed kick of the NFC Championship when, now we can start looking to the future and we don't have to, be as concerned with, what Adrian Peterson's health or legal situation is.
Yeah. It is very interesting given sort of the tug of war that they had. Hopefully, they don't, this is so weird to say, hopefully they don't stick with that commitment dogmatically, I think is the problem. The dogmatic sort of stick to the commitment that they made sort of early in the off season. Give players like Jerick McKinnon, who's going to be the running back of the future, unless they really want to draft a new guy. Give Jerick McKinnon, a lot more chances to shine.
I would support that. That would be an acceptable outcome for me. Should we? Do you have any other particular items of note that you wanted to mention before we attack the mailbag?
There's some stuff that's interesting. So for example, Mike Zimmer mentioned, maybe this is the only other thing before we get to the mailbag. Mike Zimmer mentioned about Teddy Bridgewater that he likes more what he's been doing on the deep ball. It's an off-season story. I'm going to have something up on Cold Omaha about this off-season story that I won't have much data on, but is worth taking a look at. It's it's nice, that Teddy Bridgewater is developing a more complete game. Sort of the biggest area of weakness that he had, in terms of sort of where the ball was going, was deep accuracy. Mike Zimmer mentioned a specific anecdote where he beat the defense on a hard count, and as an aside, Teddy Bridgewater was the best quarterback in the NFL at winning on hard counts. He led the league, tied with Aaron Rodgers for making, defenses jump off sides on hard counts. And he had significantly fewer, plays to do that in. And so I think as a percentage of plays, just in general, he led the league in sort of hard count offsides generated per play, if you want to make that a stat. But yeah, he was the best in the league at that, but, we couldn't take advantage of it because they would run the ball, whether or not that's a Norv thing, whether or not that's a Teddy thing. I suspect actually it's a Teddy thing. As much as I don't want to criticize the dude, I suspect that that's a Teddy thing. At the very least, it's got to be something where Teddy has to tell Norv Turner, like, hey, let me audible into this. Or let me tell everybody this is what they need to do as soon as sort of a hard count is generated. But I think like 16 or all 17 or something like that were all runs, so they weren't able to take advantage of it. But in this anecdote, evidently he caught the defense off sides on a hard count and heaved the ball deep, 55 yards. He had a free receiver running. I don't remember who it was or whether or not Zimmer even mentioned who it was. But it was a completion, and it was evidently it was like, pinpoint perfect, sort of in the bucket. There's only so much you can take from individual anecdotes. We saw Teddy struggle in training camp a little bit on the deep ball, not as much as he did during the season, but we definitely saw evidence of struggles in the deep ball during training camp. So if we don't see those struggles going into training camp this year, that may be worth noting. Again, Zimmer is somebody that is not likely to lie about what he's saying and only talks about stuff that he's confident about talking about, and is also unlikely to heap unwarranted praise. But you have to be careful, because if you look good in minicamp, you could just be Jamar Johnson.
Indeed. Shall we mailbag? I've got a couple of good quality email questions here. First of all, Alex Jury writes in to say, first off, thank you guys for calling attention to just how bad the O-line was last year in the context of being optimistic about the offense and Teddy this year. I played O-line in college and thus have been trained/brainwashed into watching games like I'm watching tape, and it was really hard to watch sometimes. Second, at what point can having enough number 2 wide receivers make up for not having a true number 1? We'll see what Treadwell turns out to be, but if enough guys can play to a number 2 wide receiver level and the O-line is improved enough to free up Teddy and the tight ends, does it really matter? Seattle and New England, Gronk notwithstanding, haven't had a true number 1 wide receiver for a while, and they've done fine.
All right. You're welcome, Alex, for calling attention to the O-line. It was,
anytime.
It was pretty. Yeah, anytime. We love to criticize the team more. No, but yeah, it is pretty difficult to watch, and I imagine for someone who's a little bit more familiar with like O-line technique and the job of the O-line and stuff like that, it's even harder to watch. So that sucks for you. I'm sorry. But as to your question, sort of, at what point does not having enough number 2 wide receivers make up for not having a true number 1? I think that this is actually something that, we could have even brought up with Justin. This probably actually coincides with the decline of the running game in the NFL in terms of its importance and in terms of its perceived importance. I think that, having 1 wide receiver and 1 running back that could do everything for you was really, really important. But now, you've got more good wide receivers in the NFL. I think if you generated a top 10 list of wide receivers right now from 100 different people, you get a bunch of different lists. Whereas if you did that like in 2006, you'd get, much more similar looking lists. Even the number 1 receiver is up for debate now. Is it Julio Jones? Do you want to count, Josh Gordon? Maybe you don't. Maybe it's AJ Green. Maybe it's Odell Beckham. It's a lot more difficult to determine that.
No, it's obviously Antonio Brown.
That's what I believe, but a lot of people don't.
But anyway.
But yeah, so there's more good receivers, right? And I think a lot of those good receivers win in a bunch of different ways. And, to the extent that, the definition of a number 2 wide receiver tends to be different depending on, which person you ask. I think that you're right that having enough good receivers makes up for not having a very great receiver or a great receiver or, whatever, right? Is Antonio Brown a number one receiver? Depending on the definition that people use. No, he's not. Maybe he is. Is it the guy that changes the architecture of the defense? Then he is. Is it the split end that wins, either deep downfield or wins contested catches? Then he's not. But you don't even need a guy that's going to change the architecture of defense. I mean, obviously it's preferable, right? It's always preferable to have better players. But I think that the success of New England, I would argue actually that despite how popular Demaryius Thomas was and despite how many touchdowns that Eric Decker got, I would argue that in terms of the role, a lot of ways people define number one receiver, that wasn't going to be true for a lot of those incredible offenses that Denver put together recently. Seattle doesn't have one. Some of these successful teams don't have a number one receiver, and some of these really, really prolific teams don't. I mean, Drew Brees, he's been working with Marcus Colston as his number one receiver, a guy who spent over 50% of his snaps in the slot, and has been able to generate some pretty good offenses without, like a number one. The difference between New England and New Orleans versus everyone else, they had Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski, whereas the Vikings have Kyle Rudolph. But I still think that that's an important distinction to make. If your quarterback can find open guys, having a bunch of open guys is fine, and you can generate successes, maybe just not highlights.
Well, there you go. Alex continues. Lastly, I'm trying to make the Ark stick as a nickname for US Bank Stadium, because it looks like a giant boat. Cue the biblical references. I'll also settle for the Technodrome as a shout out to all the technology in the stadium and it being built on the site of the fallen Metrodome, quite literally. Plus, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the win.
I am very enthused in general about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I am not enthused about the Michael Bay versions.
Whoa. Badly reviewed. A lot of people dislike the new, and there's a new one coming out in like a week or two. We are not being paid for this film promo, regrettably. Anyway, I really liked the reboot, and it took like really getting in touch with my inner 13-year-old to find it, because the dialogue is, well,
awful. It's awful,
stilted. But when
in a way that's awful.
When hasn't it been? Like, have you watched the one where they go back to feudal Japan lately?
Lately, okay.
It's fine, but it's not like.
Wait. Are you talking about the show or the movies?
The movies. The third movie where they went back to feudal Japan, the last like animatronic movie possibly ever made. The last one with the costumes. Suffers from a similarly silly story and writing.
Oh yeah, the movies have never been great. I'm just talking about the show, and the new show isn't as good as the old show. Maybe that's nostalgia talking.
Probably. Well, I'm here to tell you that the new movies, if you are willing to suspend all like disbelief and just accept that this is a franchise that you enjoy, that will occasionally have some Easter eggs thrown in with the like gratuitous explosions and we'll call it stilted dialogue, then it's an entirely enjoyable experience. And frankly, whether you watch the new ones or not, like you were saying, Ninja Turtles is such an inseparable part of almost every like Midwesterner's upbringing of our age, or even younger, or even possibly a little older. Like it's a cultural icon, I would say.
As for the nicknames, the Ark is a fine nickname. The Technodrome, also a fine nickname. I approve of both of those choices. I do not think that they will stick. I see potential for the Ark, but I don't think that they'll stick. I think that they'll unfortunately end up calling it the Bank, and so we'll have two the Banks. Welcome to our financial overlords, Minneapolis.
And you can take that to the bank. Which one?
Oh God, Dusty, why? Anyway.
I didn't even do the impersonation this
time. If you
time.
have a bank-related nickname, I still prefer the Vault. But I don't even think the Ark is settling. I think that's a very good nickname. And if listeners to this podcast want to propagate the Ark as the nickname, I have no issue with that. But you need to come together and pick like the Ark or the Vault because,
I support the Ark. The Ark is good. I like the Technodrome better. Still casting my lot with Glass Case of Emotion. Although I know that is a
little bit of that's more of a mouthful than Technodrome.
Yeah. That's fine. It's just such a great nickname. But I would support either of these as long as we all can coalesce behind something that we can agree to call the stadium where we will destroy the Packers week 1. That's what matters most.
Someone's going to call it the cheese grater.
The cheese board.
But that's just where you serve. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Logan Reed writes in with an email question, which you also can submit email questions to us. Our email address is norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. I feel like I frequently forget to mention that in the outro promotion of the show. Anyway, Logan writes, name the 11 defensive players in their primes that Zimmer has coached who you think would be on the first team all-Zimmer team. I know Darren Woodson would be a lock, as Zimmer has called him the best safety and possibly best player at any position he's ever coached. Terrence Newman has been with Zim for, I think, 9 of 11 years and 3 teams since he's been in the league, so he seems like a Zimmer guy. Harrison Smith seems like a lock to me, and Anthony Barr isn't unlikely either.
That's pretty tough, and I kind of wish I had opened this email before the podcast started, because then I'd be able to give a really good answer.
I see. I tried to warn you like yesterday. This was coming down the pike.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, how about you give me your 11 because you did research.
All 11?
That seems relevant, right?
That's fair.
And then we can, if I think of a name, debate whether or not that name belongs, with that group. And I think that one thing that we need to keep in mind is if Zimmer coached a guy, but he didn't coach the guy in that prime, I think it's unfair. Like if he coached like one season of a dude and it wasn't a good season, like that can't possibly count, right? No.
It has to be a player who was good during the time that Zimmer was coaching him, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That seems.
So
like
do you have? Okay. Cool. So do you have dudes?
I am plumbing the depths of Pro Football Reference for them as we speak.
Okay. Well, I will say that you probably want Charles Haley at defensive end, right? I think like that. That sounds about right. And then I think at defensive tackle, you probably want Geno Atkins. I don't know what to do at other defensive tackle or other defensive end, again, because I am a bad podcaster and I did not open this email early enough. Then I think at safety, you could have Darren Woodson at strong safety. You could have Harrison Smith at free safety. I think that's pretty easy. And I think at cornerback, Terrence Newman is fine. The other one, obviously, Deion Sanders.
Yes.
I don't think there's any question about that. So you have to fill out, those other 2 defensive line spots, and I think all 3 linebacker spots. I certainly do not have an argument against Anthony Barr yet, but he's been pretty good, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were like 3 linebackers that Zimmer's coached that have been better because he's coached a lot of good teams.
It's true. He was with the Cowboys, whose rosters I am cruising through to maybe pick up a couple of more names because of course you got to have Terrence Newman near the top of the list,
right? I mean, and Terrence Newman, I think a lot of people maybe they don't forget, but they kind of gloss over sort of how great he was in his prime. Obviously, not Deion Sanders, not Hall of Fame or anything like that, but those are the kind of standards you kind of have to hold these defensive backs to, and I think that he meets those standards because he has been pretty phenomenal for Zimmer. I mean, obviously, Pac-Man Jones has been very good. I would take Chris Harris from a couple of years ago over Terrence Newman of a couple of years ago, but I think that in their prime, I would take Terrence Newman over Chris Harris. Not Chris Harris, Leon Hall. I always get the 2 confused. Chris Harris, the Bronco, Leon Hall, the Bengal. Leon Hall is what I meant.
We already mentioned DeMarcus Ware, right? He's somewhere here on the list.
Was he with Zimmer?
Yeah.
2006?
The 2008 season the 2007 Dallas Cowboys when they went 13-3.
Zimmer was defensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons in 2007.
Was he really? I swear to... Oh, wow. Well, there you go. Then not him.
Oh, no. So is that when he was drafted, 2007?
I think so. Look real quick. This is how fast your host can internet, everybody.
No. He had DeMarcus Ware because DeMarcus Ware was drafted in 2005. Which means he had him for 2005, 2006, and he had an 11.5 sack season in 2006.
Okay, so DeMarcus Ware's in. He fills a position of need. He was good for 1 year. He was better, I guess, the next year and then the year after. But I still think he counts.
So okay, no, that's fine. We just have to make sure that they were good by the time he was coached by Zimmer, and he wasn't there for just one bad year.
Well, he was there for his first year in 05, and then he had a decent year in 06, and then he had an outstanding year in 07. So I think we could count him.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So then the next question is, so I think defensive tackle, you could get a player like Jay Ratliff. I think that. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler. I think that he's been really good as a nose tackle. Put him next to Geno Atkins, then I think you're in a good spot. I'm kind of curious, if because I don't think Demontepeko, measures up. I'm wondering, if Linval Joseph, if Linval Joseph's this last year was better than any year that Jay Ratliff has had, including all 4 of those Pro Bowl years.
I didn't want to immediately stack the All-Zimmer team with Vikings, but I really did want to throw out a possibility of Everson Griffin and also Linval Joseph being on
well, you have to pick Charles Haley. So the question is Everson Griffin over DeMarcus Ware, because we've decided ultimately that if you get a good year in a Zimmer era, you get the prime. Then I think Everson Griffin is sort of off the list.
Yeah, all right. By comparison.
Yeah.
He could be a backup on the All-Zimmer team.
Yeah, he's a backup on the All-Zimmer, easily. But yeah, you've got defensive end Marcus Ware, you've got defensive end Charles Haley, you've got defensive tackle Geno Atkins. You probably, I'll put Linval Joseph there at nose tackle. Then we just have to figure out the linebackers, which evidently it's not very easy.
It's turning out. Well, regrettably, Mike Zimmer has coached some not very winning teams.
Well, who have the best linebackers been with those Cincinnati Bengals? Like, it's not likely that he coached all bad linebackers of Cincinnati. I mean, I don't really think as much of like Ray Malaluga and Vincent Ray as a lot of people do. But I mean, we've got to be missing somebody that he's coached. Right, so we're able to take a look at some of the players that Zimmer's been. Yeah, so linebacker's kind of like not great. Obviously he's coached Chad Greenway, but I said only if you've coached good seasons. Chad had a much better season under Zimmer when he first started coaching him in 2014, but I still think he hasn't had a good season yet, so I'm not going to include him. Anthony Barr certainly counts. He's actually probably the best linebacker that he's had, so good spot, Logan. We went through a couple of other these guys, and in Dallas, I couldn't find a linebacker that jumped out to me that wasn't also like a pass rusher like DeMarcus Ware. And so I kind of Hail Mary to Atlanta the one season, see if there was like anything salvageable there. And it turns out there was. Keith Brooking, pretty good middle linebacker. I decided also to take Vontaze Burfict from Cincinnati. And he's like anti-athletic or whatever, but he's had a good season under Zimmer, so he's a pretty good linebacker, even if you have to deal with all the other crap that he does. And so you end up with Vontaze Burfict, Anthony Barr, and Keith Brooking, who's pretty good. So that ends up being our all 11 team. So once more, that's DeMarcus Ware and Charles Haley at defensive end, Geno Atkins and Linval Joseph at defensive tackle. At linebacker, that's Vontaze Burfict, Anthony Barr, and Keith Brooking. And in the secondary, you've got Charles Woodson, Harrison Smith, Terrence Newman, and Deion Sanders. So not bad as a defense, I think.
That would be an acceptable team to field. And probably unable to get into one field under current salary cap restrictions.
Well, I mean, if you drafted half of them.
if you could turn them all back to draft age and then redraft half of them, take their 5th-year option, and then just fire sale the whole, like after you win a Super Bowl. Yeah, no, perfect.
Well, I'm just thinking because, well, obviously it's a made-up scenario, but he had a good DeMarcus Ware on a rookie contract, a great Geno Atkins on a rookie contract, a great Harrison Smith on a rookie contract, and a very good Terrence Newman on a rookie contract. So the free agents were Charles Haley, Deion Sanders. I think Charles Woodson signed a second contract when he was with them. before Zimmer, could, do his magic. And hold on. And I think that, Terrence Newman, did he get him on a rookie contract? He might have.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not bad, right? That's not bad.
No. Not even a little. Mr. Bojangles.
And I keep saying Charles Woodson. I keep meaning
Darren Woodson. Not the other phenomenal Woodson.
Or Rod Woodson.
The third, older, phenomenal Woodson.
Yeah.
A couple of Twitter questions. Mr. Bojangles at King of Carrot F writes us, is Arif still worried about Kwan's lack of athleticism? Are you, Arif?
Yeah, of course. I mean, nothing has changed since he was drafted, so I don't know why I wouldn't be worried about it. He's had a couple of concentration drops in OTAs, but other than that, we haven't really heard much about him in OTAs or minicamp, which means we really haven't heard anything because those concentration drops don't really bother me that much. Because I felt like his hands were overrated coming out of college, but it's not like they bothered me or anything. So, I'm still definitely, concerned about it, and I will be until sort of we see evidence that he can produce aside from it, or that his athleticism is closer to his 2014 self in training camp and the preseason. So, yeah, I'm worried about it, but I still don't think it was necessarily a bad pick. He's just he wasn't my top receiver.
Ojibwe pun at G Battis. I don't know. I don't speak Ojibwe. I can't correctly divine the pronunciation of the word to make it an actual Ojibwe pun. At any rate, he writes in with a question. Every year the Lions find a new way to screw it up. How this year?
I think it's Guy Battis because that's how GUI is pronounced in French. Anyway, sorry, I still don't understand the pun, Ojibwe pun. How were the Lions screwed up this year? Probably an injury. The one thing Justin kept pointing out in the podcast was that a lot of these guys at the front they're pretty happy with, but there's a really shaky depth behind them. So it could happen to Ziggy Ansah, it could happen to DeAndre Levy again. There's no linebackers behind them. It could happen to even Kyle Van Noy, and it would hurt the defense. It could happen to any of the secondary. They've got no depth behind them. So that could be, sort of where the wheels kind of fall off. That offensive line, it's probably a lot improved. They definitely improved in sack rate over the second half of the season. It was the worst in the NFL. I think in sack rate, no, it wasn't the worst in the NFL. It was the Vikings. Over the first half of the season, it was pretty bad. And we saw that in the Vikings' game against the Lions, where Matt Stafford got hit anywhere between 7,000 and 20,000 times. Enough that he had to take an X-ray after the game. And so that improvement in the offensive line is going to be critical, but a lot of it's projection. You're moving Riley Reef from the left side to the right side, and you've got a rookie left tackle. Or you've got Riley Reef on the left side, and he's not amazing. He's okay. And you've got a guy who's a rookie who's learning the right tackle position for the first time. You've got a not very good center, and you've got some projections at guard. I think that so Larry Warford had a great rookie season, then he dropped off. In Tomlinson didn't even have an amazing rookie season, an all right rookie season. We'll see sort of where he goes. So I think that the offensive line is sort of a question. I think they've got pretty good depth along the offensive line, but the starting five don't inspire confidence. I think kind of the same with the Vikings. Starting five don't really inspire confidence, but at least I like the depth. And they don't really have a bunch of depth across their defense. So, yeah, I think that's how they would screw it up.
And I'm going to file away our last question from Cody Whittington until next week. He offers a query about the Chicago Bears backfield. And maybe we can address that next week, perhaps with a Bears-related guest.
Yeah, hopefully we can draw one in.
That would be ideal. We'll give it a shot. Do you have any new pieces or projects that you would like to plug before we cut bait on this episode?
Yeah, no, I've got a bunch of pieces going up. Just published a couple at Cold Omaha, breaking down some of the some of the recent analysis that people have done. So Football Outsiders found that Teddy Bridgewater was the sixth most after you count for drops, accurate quarterback in the NFL after you adjust for distance. It's something that people always point out. Hey, Teddy may be the most accurate quarterback in the league for Pro Football Focus's whatever, but he only threw the ball 5 yards. Even after you account for that, Teddy was like the fifth or sixth most quarterback in the NFL. So I had a link to that piece. And then, I've got another piece about sort of the pressure of the offensive line coming up. That'll be on Purple PTSD. And then there's another piece about the fact that the Vikings, we didn't even cover this in the show, that the Vikings are going to be holding joint practices with Cincinnati, thus cutting training camp short. They're going to be holding joint practices with Cincinnati, during the offseason right before the preseason game.
So exciting. So much to look forward to. And that even leaves out the specter of your training camp guide, which we will have news on in the coming weeks.
For sure. That should be a lot of fun to read, some fun to write, sometimes not fun. We'll see.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be art if you didn't suffer for it, Arif.
That's unfortunately true. Thank you, Dusty.
Yeah, it's what I'm here to do, is to help. And to host. To do things like read questions and tip my cap to all of our listeners who tune in and week out to the #1 podcast about your Minnesota Vikings. You can find us on the internet. DailyNorseman.com will be our home for probably another week or so until I finally get all the gremlins with the updated version of the website fixed. Until then, you can find Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Believe me, that last part is important. On iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play Music podcasts and wherever other fine podcasts are aggregated. You can tweet the show at Norse Code DN. You can tweet Arif at Arif Hassan NFL. You can tweet me at Dusty O'Connell. You can tweet our guest this week, Justin Rogers, at Justin_Rogers, like Mr. Rogers, not Aaron Rodgers. And you can email us your questions at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Facebook page is facebook.com/Daily Norseman. And if you want to throw a few bucks our way, help pave the way for Arif to go to training camp and report with proper internet services all the way through it, then please check our PayPal link, paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or patreon.com/NorseCode for a recurring donation in any amount that you feel is appropriate. But we just want about $3.50. So for Justin and Arif, James, our producer, and myself, Dusty O'Connell, all of us at Norse Code would like to thank you for listening to episode 136. Oof, that's so many episodes.
Woo!
And our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.